My friends, for centuries the world has repeated the words of the Master, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God." And yet very few have paused long enough to ask where this kingdom is to be found, or why so many sincere seekers feel as though they are walking in circles, praying without answer, striving without peace. And so I want to speak to you not as one offering a new doctrine, but as one reminding you of what Jesus himself revealed so simply, so plainly, that the human mind overlooked it. The kingdom of God is within you, not above you, not ahead of you, not hidden in some distant geography, nor reserved for a future moment after death. Within you, within your consciousness, within the very life you are living at this instant. You see, the tragedy of much spiritual seeking is that it begins with the assumption that God is absent. And when you believe God is absent, your entire search becomes an attempt to bring God from somewhere else into your experience. And when you believe the kingdom is far off, your spiritual journey becomes a lifelong effort to reach what seems forever beyond your grasp. But the Master did not say, "Seek to bring the kingdom," nor did he ask you to journey toward it as though it were an object hidden behind the stars. He revealed a presence already here, already complete, already functioning as the very life of your being. If you have ever cried out, "Where is God? Why does God feel distant?" you have already accepted the premise that creates all spiritual frustration. And so today, let us lay that false premise aside. Let us begin from the truth. Let us begin from the recognition that God is not a traveler who must arrive, not a power that must be summoned, not a reward that must be earned. God is the living presence at the center of your consciousness, the invisible life that is your life, the infinite love that animates every breath and movement of your existence. You have not been failing in your spiritual search. You have simply been taught to look outward when Jesus pointed inward. You have been told to strive for what must be realized, not achieved. And so, as we embark upon this journey together, let us do so with a humble willingness to release the old idea of God as a far-off being who occasionally intervenes, and open ourselves to the recognition of God as the very essence of our own being. In this hour, I invite you not to strive, not to struggle, but to awaken, to discover that the kingdom you have sought so long with such earnestness has never been hidden from you. It has been present, fully present, within the depths of your own consciousness, awaiting only your recognition. And as this recognition dawns, you will find yourself at peace, not because you have reached God, but because you have discovered that God has never departed from you. Now let us look more deeply into the very reason spiritual seekers become weary, discouraged, and disheartened in their search for God. It is not because God is difficult to find. It is not because heaven is hidden behind a veil that only the worthy may lift. It is because almost the entire world, including the religious world, has trained us to seek God where God is not. And when you seek where God is not, you can only return empty-handed, no matter how sincere your prayer or how devout your heart. Consider for a moment how many times you have turned to the outer world expecting it to reveal God to you, expecting a person, a sign, a manifestation, a change in circumstance, a divine intervention to prove that God is present. And yet every time you do this, you unknowingly affirm a belief the Master never taught, that God is separate from you, separate from your consciousness, separate from your very life. And the moment you accept separation, even unconsciously, you cannot help but feel the weight of spiritual loneliness, the ache of believing God is somewhere you are not. When the mind believes in distance, it naturally seeks solutions in distance. It prays from a sense of lack. It reaches outward in desperation. It tries to bring God down into the moment or to coax peace into a troubled situation. But my friends, This is the very reason prayer feels unanswered. Not because God is withholding anything, but because we are praying from a premise that has no spiritual foundation, the premise of absence. Do you see the problem? If you pray as though God is far, you reinforce the illusion of distance. If you believe the kingdom is ahead of you, you bind yourself to endless searching. If you imagine that God's guidance, God's provision, or God's healing must travel toward you from outside, you silently deny the truth that God is the life of your being here now, fully present and wholly complete. This is why the world's seekers grow tired. It is not the search that exhausts them, it is the direction of the search. Outward effort consumes energy, inward realization restores it. Outward effort breeds fear, inward realization releases it. Outward effort implies that something essential is missing. Inward realization reveals that nothing has ever been absent. The frustration so many experience in their spiritual lives arises from an innocent but fundamental misunderstanding. The belief that God's presence must be obtained rather than recognized, sought rather than realized, requested rather than revealed from within. And as long as the mind believes that God and man stand apart, your prayers, your meditations, your spiritual practices will feel like attempts to bridge an impossible distance. Let us be very clear. You are not frustrated because God is silent. You are frustrated because you have been listening in the wrong direction. When you look outward for what is already within, you can only encounter emptiness. But when you turn within, even slightly, even with the smallest mustard seed willingness, you begin to feel a subtle shift, a softening, a quiet assurance. You sense that you are not striving toward God, you are resting in God. You sense that the spiritual journey is not the path of reaching outward, but the path of awakening inward. And it is this awakening that leads us to the next stage of our spiritual unfolding. Let us look now at the teaching of the Master, not through the lens of tradition, nor through the weight of inherited interpretation, but through the quiet inner illumination that reveals spiritual truth as it is. For Jesus spoke words that were not meant merely to inform the mind, but to awaken the soul to its own divine reality. And among these words, none are more central, more misunderstood, and more transformative than the statement, "The kingdom of God is within you." You must understand that Jesus was not pointing to a place. He was not describing a realm to be reached after death, nor a kingdom that would someday descend visibly upon the earth. He was speaking from the consciousness of one who lived in perpetual union with the infinite. When he used the word kingdom, he was describing the awareness of God's presence, an awareness that transcends time, transcends form, and reveals itself as the substance of all being. And when he declared that this kingdom is within you, he tore down every doctrine of distance that humanity had built around God. But the human mind, bound to the senses, could not grasp such a revelation. And so through the centuries, the teachings of Jesus were interpreted through the framework of duality, God above and man below, heaven in the future and struggle in the present. Yet Jesus himself never taught duality. He taught oneness. He taught immediacy. He taught the infinite nearness of God. I and my Father are one. The Father is within me. My kingdom is not of this world. Let us look now at the teaching of the Master, not through the lens of tradition, nor through the weight of inherited interpretation, but through the quiet inner illumination that reveals spiritual truth as it is. For Jesus spoke words that were not meant merely to inform the mind, but to awaken the soul to its own divine reality. And among these words, none are more central, more misunderstood, and more transformative than the statement, "The kingdom of God is within you." Let us look now at the teaching of the Master, not through the lens of tradition, nor through the weight of inherited interpretation, but through the quiet inner illumination that reveals spiritual truth as it is. For Jesus spoke words that were not meant merely to inform the mind, but to awaken the soul to its own divine reality. And among these words, none are more central, more misunderstood, and more transformative than the statement, "The kingdom of God is within you." The moment you imagine the kingdom as something to be entered through effort, you have already stepped outside it. But the moment you realize that God is the very essence of your being, the very breath that moves through you, the very intelligence that animates your life, you have already entered the kingdom without moving an inch. For this kingdom is not reached by time or distance, it is revealed through recognition. Do you see the problem? If you pray as though God is far, you reinforce the illusion of distance. If you believe the kingdom is ahead of you, you bind yourself to endless searching. If you imagine that God's guidance, God's provision, or God's healing must travel toward you from outside, you silently deny the truth that God is the life of your being here now, fully present and wholly complete. It is the unchanging, invisible reality behind all visible form. And when he declared that this kingdom is within you, he tore down every doctrine of distance that humanity had built around God. In this recognition, spiritual seeking begins to change shape. You are no longer reaching outward for God's presence. You are no longer waiting for a future manifestation. You are no longer living in anticipation of a divine intervention that may or may not come. Instead, you are awakening to the truth that the presence you seek is the very consciousness with which you are listening to these words. It is the unchanging, invisible reality behind all visible form. And it is here, in this dawning realization, that the shift from asking God to realizing God begins. When we read Jesus through Goldsmith's consciousness, we discover that the teachings were never meant to direct us toward a future salvation, but toward a present realization. They were never meant to create believers, but revealers, not followers of doctrine, but awakeners to the inner Christ, the inner kingdom, the inner presence that has always been the life of our being. The world prays in one way, and the Christ consciousness prays in another. The world prays by petition, "God, please do this for me. Please intervene. Please fix. Please repair." But the Master and all who have awakened as he awakened pray by realization. They do not try to bring God into a situation. They do not attempt to persuade God to act. They rest in the quiet, knowing that God, being infinite, omnipresent, and indivisible, is already the only presence in that situation, whether or not appearances agree. This is the radical shift that Joel Goldsmith emphasized. Prayer is not a method of getting God to do something. Prayer is the realization that God already is all. And this realization becomes possible only when we stop treating God as though he were outside our own being. You see, the moment you ask God to enter a circumstance, you have implicitly assumed his absence. And the moment you assume his absence, you cannot possibly experience his presence, for the very premise of your prayer is separation. The bootless cry, as Goldsmith called it, is the prayer of a mind that imagines God is somewhere else. But when you understand the truth, when you realize that God is not coming from afar, that God is not outside the problem, not outside the body, not outside the relationship, you stop trying to reach outward and you begin to rest inwardly. You begin to sense that there is a presence at the core of your being, a presence that does not need your persuasion, your pleading, or your pressure. You begin to discover that God is not the answer to your prayer. God is the silence that reveals there was never a question. Let us be very practical here. When you ask God to heal a condition, you are assuming a power apart from God, a power that caused the illness. When you ask God to fix a relationship, You are assuming that another person holds power over your peace. When you ask God to open a door, you are assuming that human circumstance can block divine activity. All of this is spiritual impossibility. There is no power apart from God. There is no presence apart from God. There is no activity, no substance, no law that can stand outside the one. And so Goldsmith would say, stop giving power to the problem. Realize that God is the only power present, and the problem dissolves of itself. This is the essence of the shift. We stop asking God to change the outer picture. We realize God is the invisible reality behind all pictures. And when we do this, something wondrous happens. We find that fear loosens its grip. We find that the mind becomes still. We find that circumstances begin to shift without our manipulation, not because we ask God to change them, but because we recognize the presence that was always governing them. As long as you believe your good comes from outside, from people, from the world, from favorable conditions, you will continue to pray outwardly, anxiously, pleadingly. But the moment you realize that God is the life of your life, the peace of your peace, the intelligence of your mind, the substance of your supply, and the harmony of your relationships, you will find that you no longer pray to get. You pray to realize, to become aware of what is eternally true. This is the prayer of the mystic. This is the prayer of the master. This is the prayer of all who have entered the kingdom consciousness. Not a prayer of asking, but a prayer of recognition. Not a prayer of seeking, but a prayer of seeing. Not a prayer of striving, but a prayer of resting in the truth that God is already here. And it is this recognition that prepares us to discern the great distinction between material sense and spiritual consciousness, which is the foundation for entering the kingdom within. Before we can enter the kingdom within, we must understand why the outer world appears so real, so commanding, so overwhelming. We must understand why fear grips us, why circumstances disturb us, why lack seems possible, and why God can appear distant even when we believe in Him with all our hearts. And the reason is simple, though the mind resists it at first. We have been trained from birth to trust the five senses. We have been taught that what we see, hear, taste, touch, and smell is reality. And so we live as though appearances are the final truth, unaware that we are interpreting the world through the limited instrument of material sense. Before we can enter the kingdom within, we must understand why the outer world appears so real, so commanding, so overwhelming. We must understand why fear grips us, why circumstances disturb us, why lack seems possible, and why God can appear distant even when we believe in Him with all our hearts. And the reason is simple, though the mind resists it at first. We have been trained from birth to trust the five senses. But spiritual consciousness reveals something entirely different. Spiritual consciousness is the awareness that God alone is the reality of all being. God alone is the life of every person. God alone is the substance of every form. God alone is the law governing the universe. And because God is indivisible, infinite, and omnipresent, there is no true power apart from God, no second presence, no second cause, no opposing force that can threaten the harmony already established in spirit. This is the meaning of oneness. Not that everything is spiritually connected, but that everything is spiritually one. Let us be practical. When you see disease in the body, that is the testimony of material sense. When you see conflict in a relationship, that is the testimony of material sense. When you see lack in your affairs, that is the testimony of material sense. When you see danger in the world, that too is the testimony of material sense. And if you accept these testimonies as the truth, you will experience fear, doubt, and separation. because you are living as though appearances possess reality, authority, and power. But when you rise into spiritual consciousness, something remarkable occurs. You begin to recognize that all appearance, whether harmonious or discordant, is but the play of the senses. Behind the appearance stands the spiritual reality, unchanged and unchanging. God, the only presence. God, the only power. God, the only law. God, the only life. God, the only substance. And as this recognition deepens, the outer picture begins to shift, not because you changed it through mental effort, but because you no longer give it the power it never possessed. Goldsmith would often say, you do not heal a condition. You reveal the presence of God, and the condition yields. And this is the essence of spiritual consciousness, the awareness of what is eternally true, regardless of what the senses report. The world may say, there is danger. Spiritual consciousness whispers, God is here. The world may say, there is lack. Spiritual consciousness knows. Infinite supply is the nature of God. The world may say, there is conflict. Spiritual consciousness rests in God is the harmony of all being. And the moment you accept the spiritual as real, the material loses its authority over your peace. But let us be very honest. You cannot force yourself into spiritual consciousness. You cannot affirm your way into it. You cannot shout into it or demand it. Spiritual consciousness dawns as material sense loosens its grip. And material sense loosens its grip only when we stop feeding it with fear, judgment, and the belief that it has power. The Master said, judge not according to appearance, but judge righteous judgment. Righteous judgment is not moral judgment. It is spiritual recognition, the ability to look straight at the appearance and know that it is not the truth. It is knowing that behind every discord, the presence of God remains untouched. It is knowing that behind every seeming lack, the fullness of Spirit is already present. It is knowing that behind every storm, the calm reality of God stands unimpaired. And it is precisely this understanding that prepares the way for the practice of entering the kingdom within, not by attempting to change appearances, but by recognizing the spiritual presence that lies behind them, within them, and as their true essence. Now that we understand the distinction between material sense and spiritual consciousness, we can begin to approach the most sacred aspect of this path, the actual practice of entering the kingdom within. And let us be clear from the beginning, this is not a practice of doing, this is not a technique for manipulating thought, nor is it a method for improving the outer world. It is a practice of recognition, of quiet receptivity, of turning from the outer appearances to the inner reality that has always been present but seldom acknowledged. In the human search for God, people have used many forms of prayer. They have pleaded, begged, affirmed, recited, commanded, declared. They have tried to convince themselves and God of what they desire. But all of these belong to the realm of the human mind. They begin with the assumption that there is a lack, and that through thought or emotion, that lack may be corrected. Spiritual listening, as Goldsmith taught it, begins from a wholly different premise, that nothing is lacking because God is already the fullness and the completeness of every moment. This is why true prayer begins in silence, not the silence of discipline or restraint, but the silence of relinquishment. The silence that arises when we release the belief that we must direct God, inform God, or persuade God. It is the silence that comes when we understand that God is not in need of our words, our instruction, or our guidance. God is the very presence we are seeking. And so spiritual listening is not an attempt to reach God. It is the willingness to allow the presence to reveal itself. When we enter this sacred silence, we do not ask, we do not seek signs, we do not attempt to feel spiritual or produce inspiration. We simply become still, inwardly still, and allow the truth to disclose itself. For spiritual truth is not created by the mind. It is revealed to the mind that is quiet enough to receive it. And what is revealed? Not always words, not always messages. More often, it is a subtle sense of peace that is not of this world, a soft assurance that does not come from reason, a gentle awareness that something real, something profound, something eternal is present right where you are. And when that presence is felt, even faintly, you have begun to enter the kingdom. For the kingdom is not a realm of thought, it is the atmosphere of God realized within your consciousness. Goldsmith would say, do not try to make anything happen in prayer. Why? Because the moment you try to make something happen, you have shifted into the human mind, and the human mind cannot enter the kingdom. The mind that tries to achieve God cannot see God, for it is trying to grasp what can only be revealed. Instead, we approach quietly. Here I am, Father, not asking, not trying, not striving, simply open. In this openness, you may become aware of a gentle inner movement as though truth is unfolding of its own accord. You may feel a sense of safety as though nothing outside you holds power. You may feel the burdens of the day loosening as though their weight was never truly yours, or you may simply feel nothing at all, yet know inwardly that something deep and invisible is taking place. This is the beginning of spiritual listening, a turning from the outer world of effect to the inner world of cause, a willingness to let God be God. And the more often you return to this stillness, not as a duty, but as a refuge, the more natural it becomes. You begin to sense the presence not only in meditation, but in the ordinary moments of life, standing in a doorway, pausing in the midst of a conversation, resting between breaths, and awareness begins to permeate your experience. The kingdom is here. Do not measure your progress. Do not attempt to capture the feeling. Simply return again and again to the stillness in which God reveals himself not as a distant being, but as the life of your own being. This is the practice by which the walls of material sense begin to thin and the light of spiritual consciousness begins to shine through. It is the doorway into the kingdom within. And now that we understand how to enter this inner sanctuary, we can begin to explore how to recognize the signs of its dawning, how to tell in the quiet moments of life that you have already stepped into the atmosphere of God's presence. As we proceed, let us understand something very important. The kingdom of God does not suddenly descend upon you like a light from the sky. It does not announce itself with trumpets, nor does it arrive with a dramatic inner explosion. The kingdom reveals itself in the quietest of ways, in subtle shifts of perception, in gentle movements of awareness, in moments so simple you might overlook them if you are searching for something grand. You see, the kingdom is not a future attainment. It is a present reality. And the moment your consciousness begins to relax into the truth of God's nearness, the signs of the kingdom begin to show themselves. They do not appear in the outer world first. They appear within you. And when they appear, they carry a distinct quality, a softness, a stillness, a peace that the world cannot imitate. One of the first signs is this: problems lose their sense of finality. You look at the same condition, the same circumstance, the same relationship, and yet something within you whispers, this is not all there is. You begin to sense that what you are seeing is but the surface of things, and behind that surface is a presence untouched by the appearance. This quiet sense of something more is the first hint that spiritual consciousness is dawning. Another sign is the easing of inner tension, not necessarily the disappearance of all outer challenges, but the loosening of the emotional grip they once held on you. You begin to observe instead of react. You begin to watch instead of fear. Even in the midst of difficulty, there arises a center of stillness, a feeling that you are upheld by something greater than the circumstance. This stillness is not self-made. It is the fragrance of the kingdom. A third sign is that you stop trying to fix life through human effort. This is not passivity. It is trust. You no longer rush to manipulate outer events or control outcomes. Instead, you turn within first. You pause, you listen, you remember the presence, and in that remembrance, you find guidance that does not come from thinking, but from knowing. When decisions arise from this inner knowing, they carry peace instead of fear. That peace is the evidence of the kingdom. You may also notice that forgiveness begins to happen without effort, not because you have willed yourself to forgive, but because the sense of separation itself begins to dissolve. You start seeing others not as separate personalities capable of harming you, but as expressions of the same divine life struggling through human limitation. The enemy becomes a brother. The insult loses power. The past releases its hold. Forgiveness becomes a natural consequence of seeing truly. Another sign is the awakening of gratitude, not gratitude for things, but gratitude for being. A quiet joy arises simply from the recognition that God is here, that life is unfolding, that you are not alone in the universe. This gratitude is not directed outward. It wells up from within, uncaused by anything external. It is the heart's response to the felt presence of God. And perhaps the clearest sign of all is this: you begin to sense that nothing is outside God. You may find yourself pausing throughout the day and silently recognizing God is here. In the grocery store, in a conversation, in a moment of conflict, in the stillness before sleep, something deep within acknowledges the presence, not as a belief, not as a philosophy, but as an inner fact. This recognition is the kingdom. You do not have to be perfect to experience these signs. You do not have to sustain them every moment. Even a fleeting glimpse is enough to show you that you have touched the edge of something real, something that does not come and go, though your awareness of it may. And every glimpse leaves a trace. Every moment of recognition strengthens the spiritual capacity to see beyond appearance. When these signs appear even subtly, you may know with certainty the kingdom has already begun to reveal itself in your consciousness. You are not approaching it, you are awakening within it. And now that you know how to recognize these early dawnings of spiritual awareness, we may move naturally into the next stage of this journey, entering more deeply into the inner kingdom through a quiet, receptive meditation, a practice not of doing, but of being. Let us now turn inward together, not to perform a technique, not to repeat words, not to achieve an experience, but simply to rest in the awareness of the presence that has been with us from the beginning. In this moment, there is nothing you must accomplish. There is nothing you must correct or improve. There is only the gentle willingness to set aside the world of appearances and allow the truth to reveal itself within your own being. We begin not by reaching outward, but by releasing every mental habit that seeks to grasp or manipulate the spiritual. There is nothing to grasp. Spirit is not an object. God is not distant. The kingdom is not a goal. We are not climbing toward God, we are relaxing into God. And so we enter this quietness with a simple inward recognition. God is here, not coming, not arriving, already here. Let the mind rest. Let the thoughts pass without engagement. Let the concerns of the outer world dissolve into the background. You are not trying to silence the mind. You are gently withdrawing attention from it, returning to the simple awareness of presence. Feel the freedom of not having to pray to God, but resting in the truth that God is already the life within you. Let this inner whisper arise of its own accord. The kingdom is within me, not as a belief, but as a fact of spiritual being. Do not try to feel anything. Feelings come and go. Truth remains. If a sense of peace comes, receive it. If no feeling comes, be at peace anyway. Truth does not depend on the senses. Now, allow this deeper recognition to settle into your awareness. God is the only presence, not the strongest presence, not a competing presence. Let this inner whisper arise of its own accord. The kingdom is within me, not as a belief, but as a fact of spiritual being. And as this recognition deepens, even slightly, the outer world begins to loosen its claim on your attention. You begin to sense the subtle atmosphere of the kingdom, a stillness that was here long before this moment, a peace that does not arise from the world and cannot be taken from you. Now, allow this deeper recognition to settle into your awareness. God is the only presence, not the strongest presence, not a competing presence. Let this inner whisper arise of its own accord. The kingdom is within me, not as a belief, but as a fact of spiritual being. I am in God. God is in me. We are one. Not two beings united, but one life expressing itself as individual being. Rest in this oneness. Do not attempt to understand it. Understanding belongs to the mind. This recognition belongs to spirit. Let this final realization unfold gently within you. The kingdom I sought is the presence that lives me. The peace I longed for is the truth of my own being. The God I prayed to is the life that I am. Rest in this truth. Let it hold you. Let it reveal itself to you in its own way, in its own time, in its own stillness. And when you return from this moment, you carry nothing outward, but something inward has quietly shifted, and this shift will reveal itself in ways you do not need to anticipate. For the kingdom has not come to you. You have awakened to the kingdom that was always here. As we bring this hour together to its quiet close, let us not think of what has been said as a lesson to be remembered, nor as a philosophy to be carried by the mind. What we have touched in these moments is not teaching, it is realization. It is the gentle unveiling of a truth that has been present within you since before time began. And the greatest gift you can give yourself is simply to continue returning to this inner awareness, not through effort, but through remembrance. For the kingdom of God is not an experience reserved for meditation alone. It is the ground upon which your true life stands. It is the air of spirit that surrounds you. It is the quiet presence that walks with you into every circumstance, every relationship, every choice, every breath. You do not leave the kingdom when you rise from silence, nor do you enter the world as though it were separate from God. The world of appearance may shift and change, but the kingdom remains the invisible reality behind every moment of your journey. Remember this. You are not a traveler seeking God. You are the place where God reveals himself. You are not a soul wandering toward the kingdom. You are the consciousness through which the kingdom comes into view. Do not struggle to hold this awareness. Do not make a task of living spiritually. Simply learn to pause many times throughout the day and gently turn inward, not to find God, but to recognize that God has never departed. In that pause, even if it is only the length of a single breath. You may notice the subtle atmosphere of peace that signals the presence, and that peace becomes your guidance. That peace becomes your protection. That peace becomes your supply. That peace becomes your wisdom. The world of appearance may shift and change, but the kingdom remains the invisible reality behind every moment of your journey. Not because you have earned it or summoned it, but because it is the very foundation of your being. Let this awareness accompany you. Let it move with you into the ordinary routines of life. Let it enter your conversations, your work, your rest, your moments of solitude, your moments of connection. Let the kingdom be the silent influence behind every step you take. And as you do, you will find that you are living in a world where nothing stands outside God, nothing opposes God, nothing diminishes God, and therefore nothing can diminish you, because your life is the life of God expressed. My friends, the search is over, not because you have reached the end, but because you have awakened to the beginning, to the presence that has been your life all along. And from this awareness, everything changes, not by your effort, but by the natural unfolding of divine harmony through your consciousness. Rest in this truth. Let it guide you. Let it illuminate the path before you, and know with quiet certainty that the kingdom of God is not merely near, it is your very self realized.
My friends, for many years we have labored under the belief that the spiritual life is achieved by effort, by striving, by pleading, by searching for some distant God who must be persuaded to enter our experience. And yet, the entire spiritual path rests upon a paradox so profound that it overturns every one of these concepts. The moment you cease trying to make God act, God begins to reveal himself. The moment you relinquish the strain of human effort, the divine presence that is forever lived within you becomes active as your very life. You see, the great barrier in our journey is not God's unwillingness, nor God's absence, nor God's delay. It is the simple fact that the human self insists upon doing what only the infinite can accomplish. We try to heal ourselves. We try to shape our supply. We try to direct our relationships. We try to improve our own nature through the machinery of the human mind. And in all of this trying, we unconsciously affirm that we are separate beings attempting to reach a God who is far away. This is the hidden belief behind every effort, but the infinite way was born of a discovery. God is not moved by effort. God is revealed in stillness. God is not reached by struggle. God is present in the quiet recognition that there is nothing to reach. The presence, the activity, the life of God is already where you are. It has been the fabric of your being since before time began. And so, I invite you to consider this paradox deeply. Nothing in your spiritual experience changes through effort, but everything changes the moment you release effort. Not as resignation, not as despair, but as the dawning realization that you are not the one who brings God into action. The Father within does the works. The presence functions of its own accord. The kingdom unfolds from within itself. Your part is simply to stop obstructing that flow with the noise of personal striving. This is the beginning of our journey today, an exploration of that sacred turning point in consciousness, the day you stop trying, and the wondrous activity of God that becomes visible the instant personal will grows quiet. Let us look more deeply now at this burden that humanity carries, the endless compulsion to try, to struggle, to push against life as though the responsibility for the universe rested upon our shoulders. Every one of us has, at some time, believed that our safety, our healing, our supply Our very spiritual progress depended upon the intensity of our effort, and yet, my friends, if you will observe closely, you will see that all such effort begins with fear, fear that God is not present, fear that God will not act, fear that the universe is operating independently of our good. This fear takes subtle forms. It makes us believe we must constantly adjust, solve, improve, overcome. We try to manage our bodies, our finances, our children, our future, as though life were a mechanism that could malfunction unless we monitored it every waking moment. And so the human being becomes weary, not because life is burdensome, but because the false sense of self imagines it must do everything. But hear this. The human mind has no capacity to bring forth harmony. The human will has no capacity to govern the activity of spirit. The personal self, however well-meaning, cannot add a single cubit to its stature through effort. And the tragedy is that in all of this striving, we reinforce the illusion that there is a separate self who must take charge of what is already governed by the infinite. This is the root of the human problem. Not sin, not ignorance, not circumstance, but the deep psychological and spiritual conditioning that whispers, if I do not act, nothing will happen, and in obedience to that whisper, the individual plunges into anxiety, trying to fix life from the outside, instead of entering the inner stillness where life is already whole. Goldsmith's discovery and the revelation of every mystic who has seen reality is simply this. Life is not lived by the human being. Life is lived by God through the human being. And every moment of strain, every moment of mental wrestling is an invisible declaration that we have forgotten this great truth. Therefore, before we can speak of surrender, before we can speak of grace, we must recognize how deeply we have trusted in our personal effort and how sincerely but mistakenly we have attempted to solve spiritual realities with human means. When this recognition dawns, not as guilt but as revelation, the burden begins to dissolve. The heart grows weary of striving, not in defeat, but in readiness for a higher way. There comes a moment in the life of every earnest seeker, a moment not planned, not manufactured, not forced, when the personal will simply begins to grow quiet. Not because you have conquered it, not because you have subdued it, but because you have begun to see through it. You begin to realize that all your attempts to direct life have led you only to temporary results and repeated frustrations. And in that realization, there is a gentle softening, an inner surrender that is not resignation but awakening. You discover, perhaps for the first time, that you are not required to run the universe. You are not required to sustain your body, or your supply, or your relationships through personal strength. You begin to sense an unseen activity, a presence that has always been moving quietly beneath the surface of things, waiting only for your silence, your non-interference, your willingness to let it be what it is. This is the turning point, and it is never dramatic, it is never thunderous. It arrives as a stillness, a moment of recognition. I can of my own self do nothing. These were not the words of a helpless man, they were the words of one who saw that the human self has no power apart from the infinite. In that recognition, the personal will dissolves like a shadow in the presence of light. As the will grows quiet, a new form of awareness emerges. You begin to listen not with your ears, but with your inner being. You sense that guidance is not something you create, it is something revealed. Harmony is not something you achieve, it is something already present. Healing is not something you produce, it is something that appears when obstruction is removed. This quieting is the beginning of grace, and you cannot force it. For forcing is the activity of the very will that must become still. Rather, it comes by seeing the futility of striving, the hollowness of personal control, and the peace that arises when you allow life to unfold of its own accord. It is at this point that a profound shift occurs. You stop trying to make God act, and you begin to recognize that God is already acting. You stop trying to generate spiritual experience, and you begin to recognize the presence that has never ceased to be the activity of your being. This turning point is the slender doorway through which the infinite enters your conscious awareness. When the personal will grows quiet, even for a moment, you find yourself entering a new atmosphere of consciousness, an inner chamber where the noise of the world does not penetrate and where the presence of God becomes a living reality. This is the sacred place of stillness that every mystic has spoken of, not as a metaphor, not as an ideal, but as an actual state of awareness in which the soul communes directly with the infinite. Understand this. True prayer is not thought. True prayer is not words. True prayer is not asking. The most powerful prayer you will ever know is the prayer in which you say nothing at all. It is the prayer of receptivity, the prayer of listening, the prayer in which the mind becomes a transparent instrument through which the spirit announces itself. You see, God does not speak in the language of human words. God speaks in a language of awareness, of inner knowing, of quiet unfolding. And you cannot hear that sacred language while the mind is busy pleading, affirming, visualizing, or attempting to direct the infinite according to its own desires. The human mind must become still, utterly still, before the activity of God can be felt. This inner chamber has been called many things: the secret place of the Most High, the closet, the deep silence, the Holy of Holies. But it is not a physical location. It is an inner posture, a yielding of the mind, a resting of the emotions, a quiet place within where you cease trying to think your way to God and instead allow God to reveal himself. And the beauty of this silence is that it does not require hours of meditation. It requires only a moment in which you turn inward and recognize the presence is here. I need do nothing. That recognition opens the door. That recognition shifts the center of activity from the human to the divine. In this silence, you are not trying to change anything. You are not working on a problem. You are not seeking guidance. You are simply abiding in the awareness of God's presence. And in that abiding, something extraordinary happens. The divine activity begins to function without your thought, without your effort, without your direction. This is the secret of spiritual living. God is always speaking, always revealing, always unfolding. It is only the constant noise of human striving that prevents us from hearing. When you enter the silence, not as escape, but as receptivity, you will discover that the infinite has been conducting the harmony of your life long before you ever knew it. There comes, in the life of every earnest seeker, a day that is unlike any day before it. It may not arrive with fanfare, and it may not come in the way you expect, but it is a day marked by a profound inner shift. It is the day you stop trying, not because you have failed, and not because you have given up, but because something within you has awakened to a deeper truth. The Father within does the work. On that day, you discover that your efforts have never been the source of harmony. Your prayers, your methods, your affirmations, sincere though they were, never produced the action of God. They only reflected your desire to reach what was already present. And in that realization, something releases. The tension goes out of your mind. The strain leaves your heart. You stop attempting to manage life, and you begin to perceive that life is managing itself through you. This moment is grace. And grace is not something you call forth. It is something that becomes visible when obstruction is removed. Grace has always been the activity of your being. Grace has always been the intelligence guiding the universe. But as long as you believe you must make God act, you cannot witness what God is already doing. When trying ceases, fear begins to dissolve, because fear is always born from the belief that you must protect, sustain, or secure yourself. But when you realize that the infinite is the life of your being, fear has no foundation on which to stand. You feel a quiet certainty, a holy assurance that nothing real can be threatened and nothing true can be taken from you. In the moment of grace, you sense that God is not something you reach, but the very essence of your being revealing itself. You recognize that every breath, every heartbeat, every unfolding event is moving according to a harmony that does not originate in human thought. And you discover a new way of living. You stop directing and begin witnessing. You stop pleading and begin listening. You stop fearing and begin trusting. You stop working from the outside and begin resting in the inner presence that needs no assistance from you. This moment of grace does not come as the result of effort, but as the cessation of effort. When the noise of striving falls silent, the gentle voice of the infinite is heard, and in that hearing, everything changes, not because you have changed conditions, but because you have awakened to the one who governs them all. This is the day you stop trying. This is the day God becomes visible not as a distant power to be persuaded, but as the living activity of your own consciousness. Now let us look at why effort, sincere, devoted, dedicated effort, actually blocks the very grace we long to experience. This is one of the deepest revelations of the spiritual life, and until it is understood, a student can spend years circling the same mountains, wondering why prayers seem unanswered and why peace appears elusive. The reason is simple. Effort is always the activity of the separated self. Effort says, I must accomplish this. I must bring harmony. I must overcome this condition. And the moment you take that position, you have unknowingly placed yourself outside of the infinite, believing there is you on one side and God on the other. In that very belief lies the obstruction. You see, God is not something separate from you. God is the very substance of your being. God is the life, the intelligence, the activity of your consciousness. So when the personal self attempts to reach God, it is like a wave trying to reach the ocean. The very act of striving affirms a separation that never existed, and in that affirmation, grace is obscured, not withheld, but hidden behind the veil of your own self-effort. Goldsmith discovered a profound spiritual law. Any attempt to use God for personal ends separates the seeker from the experience of God. You cannot use truth, because truth is not a tool, it is your identity. You cannot employ God to change conditions, because God is not a power operating upon something outside itself. God is the one power, the one presence, the one reality. The moment you try to harness this power for human improvement, you are no longer resting in the spiritual understanding of one, but have slipped back into the belief in two. Effort arises from fear and from the false assumption that the universe requires your intervention. But the infinite way teaches that nothing true needs your assistance. Harmony is never created, it is revealed. Supply is never manufactured, it is unfolded. Healing is never produced, it is recognized. These are spiritual principles, and they function only when the mind becomes still enough to let the invisible act. The invisible law of the Spirit is this: Where the personal self acts, grace is silent. Where the personal self is silent, grace acts. And so, when you cease striving, you are not becoming passive. You are stepping aside so that the divine activity, which has been present all along, may become visible in your experience. It is not your effort that heals, but your surrender. Not your plans that prosper you, but your willingness to trust the unseen order of the universe. Not your strength that carries you, but the realization that the infinite is the life that lives you. And as this becomes clear, you begin to understand why the great mystics have always taught that the highest spiritual work is not doing, but recognizing the presence, recognizing the one, recognizing that God is the only activity, and therefore there is nothing left for the personal self to accomplish. Now that we understand why effort obscures grace, we can begin to explore what life feels like when the personal self no longer carries the burden of directing, controlling, and managing existence. When the striving ceases and the inner ear opens to the activity of the spirit, a new way of living begins, one that is marked by harmony, guidance, and quiet inner assurance. This is not the life you build. It is the life that unfolds through you when you make yourself an open avenue for the infinite. The first sign of this new way of life is that you begin to act from a center of peace rather than from fear. Decisions are no longer frantic reactions to circumstances. They arise gently from within, as though whispered by an intelligence deeper than your own. You find yourself responding to situations with clarity. You did not cultivate. Compassion you did not manufacture. Wisdom you cannot claim as personal achievement. You recognize that something greater is living itself as you. Another sign is that problems lose their power to disturb you. This does not mean that appearances suddenly vanish, but your relationship to them changes completely. Instead of rushing into analysis, strategizing, or mental argument, you pause just long enough to remember that you are not a human being burdened with problems, but the transparency through which God expresses. In that pause, harmony begins to reveal itself without the slightest interference of personal thought. In this way of life, even the simplest moments become sacred. Washing a dish, speaking to a friend, answering an email, all of it becomes an opportunity to abide in the awareness that the infinite is the activity behind every gesture. You begin to sense that nothing is mundane and nothing is separate from the presence. Every task becomes an act of devotion, not because you perform it for God, but because you perform it with God as the living presence expressing itself. This daily life is not passive. It is deeply alive. It is alert, sensitive, responsive to the inner movement rather than the outer demand. You discover that you no longer must figure out your path. The path unfolds. You no longer must chase supply. Supply appears as needed. You no longer must manage relationships. Relationships begin to harmonize themselves when you meet every person from the consciousness of one. And as you walk in this new way, you notice something remarkable. Your effectiveness in the world increases, not because of greater effort, but because the source of all effectiveness is now functioning through you. The infinite way is not an escape from living. It is the deepest engagement with life, carried out from the center of God's activity rather than the strain of the personal will. In this flowing, effortless unfoldment, you begin to see the truth of Goldsmith's statement. The secret of living is letting God live your life. And once this truth is felt, not merely understood intellectually, but felt in the quiet depths of your being, you will never again seek to return to the life of struggle. The taste of inner peace is enough to make striving impossible, for you have discovered a better way, the way of letting God be God in you. As you begin living from this inner stillness without the burden of constant striving, something remarkable occurs. Life itself begins to reveal a harmony that was always present but long concealed by fear, effort, and personal will. And the evidence of this surrender does not come through dramatic miracles or sudden outward changes, though such things may happen. The true evidence appears quietly, gently, as if life were redeeming itself from within. The first and most unmistakable evidence is the disappearance of fear, not because conditions have changed, but because your sense of identity has changed. When you no longer see yourself as a vulnerable creature struggling in a chaotic universe, but as the expression of the infinite, fear loses its foundation. You discover a peace that does not depend on circumstances, and this peace becomes the atmosphere in which you live. Then you notice that relationships begin to soften. People who once seemed difficult no longer evoke the same reactions within you. You meet them not with personal judgment or memory, but with the recognition of the same presence that lives in you. And because you see differently, they respond differently, not by your manipulation, but by the silent influence of the consciousness you now embody. The world begins to meet you according to your realization of oneness. Another evidence is that solutions appear without struggle. A problem that once consumed your mind shows a way forward at the moment you release it into the silence. Supply that you once chased now flows naturally. Opportunities arise that you never planned. These are not coincidences. They are the outward signs of an inward shift. When you cease trying to control life, the divine order becomes free to manifest through the avenues prepared for it. Healing, too, begins to unfold not necessarily as instantaneous transformation, though that is possible, but as the gradual revelation that the life within you has never been sick, never broken, never incomplete. The healing does not come because you worked on the condition. It comes because you stopped believing that the condition had power. Grace reveals what has always been true. The Spirit of God within you is whole, and therefore wholeness must appear in your experience. As this surrender deepens, you begin to realize that nothing in your outer world is separate from the activity of your inner being. Life becomes a mirror reflecting your consciousness. When you abide in peace, peace appears around you. When you abide in quiet trust, the events of your life begin to move with quiet order. When you abide in the awareness of God's presence, you find that God's presence meets you in every place you walk. And so the evidence of surrender is not something you create, but something you witness. It is the dawning recognition that the universe is benevolent, that the infinite is trustworthy, and that harmony is the natural condition of life once the personal self steps aside. You begin to see that grace was never absent. It was only obstructed by the noise of striving. When surrender has taken root, life begins to redeem itself, not because you have changed the outer world, but because you have awakened to the inner presence that has always governed all things with perfect wisdom. And now, as we draw this class to a close, let us return to the essence of what has been revealed here. The entire spiritual life rests upon a single, simple recognition. God is the life of your being, and therefore there is nothing for the human self to accomplish. The Father's presence is already within you. The activity of spirit has never ceased. Harmony has never been absent. Yet the human mind, in its perpetual striving, has obscured this ever-present reality. The call of the infinite way is not a call to effort, to striving, or to achievement. It is a call to inner rest, the rest that comes when you relinquish the belief that you must make something happen and instead allow the divine activity to reveal itself. This rest is not inactivity. It is the cessation of mental noise that enables the still, small voice to be heard. And so I invite you now, gently and without pressure, to adopt a new inner attitude as you go forth from this moment. I will not attempt to direct God. I will be still and let God be God. This is the doorway to grace. This is the state of consciousness in which all good becomes visible. Do not attempt to practice this with strain or discipline. Simply pause throughout your day, even if only for a breath, and acknowledge the presence. Let the recognition arise. The Father within me is the one who performs every act. I need do nothing of myself, and you will discover that this simple turning within opens your awareness to a depth of peace you may not have known was possible. In that peace, guidance will come not from your reasoning mind, but from the divine impulse that knows your path better than you ever could. In that peace, solutions will unfold not as the result of analysis, but as the natural activity of God. In that peace, you will discover your true identity, not a struggling mortal, but the transparency through which the infinite expresses its own perfection. And as this realization settles into your consciousness, you will find that life becomes the effortless outpouring of a presence that has always been yours. The world may continue its noise, but you will walk through it with quiet certainty. Circumstances may shift and change, but you will remain anchored in the awareness that the harmony of God governs all. You will live each day not as one who must struggle, but as one who has surrendered to the divine activity already at work. So let us leave here today with a simple prayer, not spoken with words, but felt in the depth of our being. Father, I release all striving. Reveal thy presence as the activity of my life. In that prayer, the whole spiritual path is contained. In that prayer, every answer is given before the question arises. In that prayer, the seeker becomes the instrument of God's living presence. Go in peace, not because peace is something you acquire, but because peace is what you are when the striving ceases and the infinite begins to shine without obstruction. The class is ended.
Right now, you are carrying burdens that were never meant to be yours. Joel Goldsmith discovered something revolutionary about human suffering that the world kept hidden from you. What if I told you that 90% of your pain exists only because you believe it must? Your consciousness holds the key to instant freedom. The secret lies not in fighting your problems, but in understanding their true nature. Goldsmith taught that suffering is always a case of mistaken identity. You have been living as if you are the wave, forgetting you are the entire ocean. This fundamental shift in awareness dissolves problems at their source, not through struggle. Every moment you spend trying to fix, change, or improve your circumstances, you reinforce the very illusion causing your pain. Instead, Goldsmith revealed a simple practice that returns you to your true nature. When you remember what you really are, suffering becomes impossible because there is no separate self to suffer. This is not positive thinking or denial. This is recognition of what has always been true. Your real identity has never been touched by any problem, limitation, or fear. The practice begins with one powerful realization that changes everything instantly. The first step is shocking in its simplicity. Stop trying to heal yourself. Stop trying to change your circumstances. Stop trying to become enlightened. These very efforts are what maintain the illusion of separation. Goldsmith called this the practice of non-resistance, but it goes deeper than acceptance. You must recognize that the you who suffers does not actually exist. This sounds abstract until you experience it directly. Close your eyes and try to find the sufferer. Look for the one who is in pain, worried, or afraid. Search carefully in your consciousness. What you will discover will astound you. There is awareness of suffering, but no actual sufferer. There is knowing of problems, but no problem haver. This recognition is not philosophical theory, but direct experience. When you cannot locate the sufferer, suffering loses its foundation. The wave discovers it was always the ocean pretending to be separate. Practice this now. Instead of identifying with your experiences, rest as the awareness that witnesses them. This shift from being the character in the drama to being the space in which all dramas appear is the beginning of true freedom from all suffering. Joel Goldsmith emphasized that your true nature is consciousness itself, not the contents of consciousness. Every problem you face is happening to consciousness, not as consciousness. This distinction changes everything. Pain appears in awareness like a cloud in the sky, but awareness remains untouched and unlimited. The suffering personality is like a character in a movie believing the drama is real. But you are not the character. You are the screen on which all characters appear. The screen is never damaged by any movie played upon it. Wars, romance, tragedy, comedy all come and go, leaving the screen pristine and unaffected. When you rest as this aware presence, problems continue to appear but lose their sting completely. They become like shadows that cannot harm light itself. Your circumstances may remain unchanged initially, but your relationship to them transforms instantly. You discover unshakable peace in the midst of any storm. This awareness is not something you must develop or achieve. It is what you already are beneath all the mental noise and emotional turbulence. Recognition of your true nature is instantaneous, but living from this understanding consistently requires gentle, persistent practice and remembrance. The practice Goldsmith taught dissolves suffering without fighting it. Each time you notice yourself caught in worry, fear, or pain, pause and ask, who is aware of this suffering? The answer reveals your true identity as the unchanging witness of all changing experiences. This simple inquiry short-circuits the entire mechanism of personal suffering. Most people try to escape suffering by changing their thoughts or circumstances. This approach strengthens the very sense of being a separate person who needs fixing. Instead, question the reality of the sufferer itself. When you cannot find anyone actually suffering, the whole problem dissolves like a mirage. This is not denial or spiritual bypassing. Practical challenges still require practical action, but you handle life's difficulties from a place of inner stillness rather than reactive fear. Your responses become wise and effective because they arise from clarity rather than confusion and desperation. The transformation happens gradually as you consistently return to this recognition. Some days the old patterns feel very real and convincing. Other days you rest effortlessly in your true nature. Both experiences are perfect steps in awakening to the truth that suffering was always optional. Margaret came to Goldsmith's classes consumed by financial terror. For months, she practiced his technique of resting as awareness rather than trying to solve her money problems. One morning, while sitting quietly, she realized something extraordinary. The awareness observing her financial fears was itself completely abundant and free. This recognition changed everything instantly. The same bills existed, the same bank balance showed, but Margaret no longer experienced herself as someone who could be threatened by circumstances. She moved through her days from this inner abundance, making decisions from wisdom rather than panic and scarcity. Within 6 weeks, unexpected opportunities began appearing naturally, not because she manipulated anything, but because her consciousness had shifted from lack to wholeness. She attracted solutions effortlessly because she was no longer pushing them away with desperate energy. Her outer world reflected her inner transformation. The remarkable part was that Margaret's financial situation improved, but more importantly, she discovered that her sense of security had never actually depended on external circumstances. She had found the source of true abundance within her own being, which could never be taken away by any external condition. David struggled with chronic anxiety for 15 years. He tried therapy, medication, meditation techniques, but nothing provided lasting relief. Then he discovered Goldsmith's approach. Instead of trying to cure his anxiety, he began investigating who was anxious. This simple shift changed his entire experience of life. Each time anxiety arose, David would pause and search for the anxious person. He found thoughts about anxiety, physical sensations of anxiety, but never an actual anxious entity. This discovery was initially shocking, then profoundly liberating. How can you suffer when there is no sufferer to be found anywhere? The anxiety patterns continued appearing for several months, but David's relationship to them completely transformed. Instead of being overwhelmed by anxious thoughts, he watched them arise and pass away in the space of awareness. They lost their power to control his behavior and emotional state. After 8 months of this practice, David noticed that anxiety rarely appeared at all. When it did surface occasionally, it felt like weather passing through the sky of his awareness. He had discovered what Goldsmith taught, that our true nature is the peace that surpasses all understanding, always present beneath surface disturbances. Sarah's marriage was failing after 23 years. Instead of fighting for or against the relationship, she applied Goldsmith's consciousness technique to her emotional turmoil. She began resting as the awareness that witnessed her hurt, anger, and disappointment without trying to change or fix any of it. This practice revealed something unexpected. The awareness observing her marital problems was itself completely whole and unbroken. From this place of inner completeness, Sarah could respond to her husband with genuine love, rather than reactive neediness or defensive anger. Her energy completely shifted from demanding to giving. Her husband noticed the change immediately. Without Sarah trying to control or manipulate anything, their dynamic began transforming naturally. Old patterns of conflict dissolved as Sarah consistently related from her true nature rather than her wounded personality. The relationship didn't require fixing because Sarah no longer felt broken. Whether the marriage ultimately continued or ended became less important than the profound peace Sarah discovered within herself. She had learned that her happiness and wholeness never depended on anyone else's behavior. This inner freedom allowed authentic love to flow naturally without agenda or attachment to outcomes. Through Goldsmith's consciousness approach, thousands have discovered that suffering is always optional, even in the most challenging circumstances. The technique works because it addresses the root cause rather than symptoms. When you recognize your true nature as awareness itself, problems lose their ability to disturb your fundamental peace and freedom. If these transformation stories inspire you to discover your own freedom from suffering, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. Which story resonated most deeply with your heart? Beyond the primary technique, Goldsmith taught complementary practices that deepen your recognition of consciousness. The first is called impersonal healing. Instead of seeing yourself as someone with problems, begin seeing through the illusion entirely. Problems are not personal possessions but temporary appearances in the field of awareness. When physical pain arises, instead of thinking, "my back hurts," recognize, there is an experience of back pain appearing in consciousness. This subtle shift removes the false sense of ownership that intensifies all suffering. You are not the owner of experiences. You are the space in which all experiences appear and disappear. Practice this with every challenging situation. There is anxiety appearing instead of "I am anxious." There is sadness arising rather than "I am sad." This grammatical change reflects a profound spiritual truth. You are the unchanging awareness within which all states come and go like passing weather. This impersonal perspective immediately reduces the intensity of difficult emotions and physical sensations. When you stop claiming ownership of temporary experiences, they lose their power to define or control you. You discover yourself as the vast space of consciousness rather than its limited contents. Another powerful technique Goldsmith taught is truth realization. When faced with any problem, instead of trying to solve it, realize the truth about your identity. Remind yourself, "I am not the body that can be sick. I am not the mind that can be confused. I am not the person who can lack anything essential." This is not denial, but recognition of what you fundamentally are beneath all appearances. Your true nature as consciousness is never sick, never confused, never lacking. When you rest in this understanding, problems may continue appearing, but they cannot touch your essential being or disturb your inner peace. Goldsmith discovered that dwelling in truth realization dissolves problems more effectively than trying to fix them directly. Truth has inherent healing power. When you align with reality rather than illusion, your outer world begins reflecting this inner clarity and wholeness in practical, tangible ways. Practice this now. Whatever challenge you currently face, recognize that your true self is completely untouched by this situation. Feel the peace and freedom that is always present when you rest in your real identity as pure, aware presence rather than the fictional character who seems to have problems. The third complementary practice is conscious non-reaction. Most suffering comes from our resistance to what is already happening. Goldsmith taught that when you fully accept the present moment without trying to change it, you discover the peace that was always here underneath your struggling against reality. This does not mean becoming passive or failing to take practical action. It means responding from inner stillness rather than emotional reactivity. When you stop fighting what is, you can see clearly what needs to be done, if anything. Most problems resolve naturally when we stop feeding them with our resistant energy. Practice allowing whatever is happening right now to be exactly as it is. Notice the immediate relief that comes from dropping your internal argument with reality. This acceptance is not resignation, but recognition that peace is available in any circumstance when you stop demanding that life be different. From this state of conscious non-reaction, you become incredibly effective in handling life's challenges. Your actions arise from wisdom rather than fear, from love rather than defensiveness. You discover that most situations require much less effort and worry than you previously believed necessary for successful living. The final complementary technique is identity anchoring. Throughout your day, repeatedly return to the recognition of what you truly are. Set gentle reminders to pause and rest as awareness itself, rather than getting lost in the drama of personal identity and its endless concerns and fears. You can practice this anywhere, in traffic, during meetings, while cooking, before sleep. Simply ask, what am I beneath all these thoughts and experiences? Rest in the aware presence that is looking through your eyes right now. This presence is your true face, unchanged by any life circumstance. The more consistently you anchor in your real identity, the less convincing the stories of limitation and suffering become. They begin feeling like old movies you have watched many times. Familiar, but no longer compelling or believable. You see through the illusion of being a separate person who can be threatened. After several months of regular identity anchoring, you will notice that consciousness techniques become effortless and natural. You live increasingly from your true nature rather than visiting it occasionally. This is the goal. Not peak experiences of freedom, but ordinary, consistent recognition of what you have always been. The most common obstacle students face is the mind's resistance to these simple truths. Your thinking patterns have been reinforcing the illusion of separation for decades. When you begin practicing consciousness techniques, old mental habits will seem to fight back with increased intensity and frequency. This resistance is actually a positive sign that the practices are working. Like fever breaking an illness, mental turbulence often increases temporarily as false beliefs lose their grip on your identity. Goldsmith called this the darkest hour before dawn phenomenon. Persistence through this phase leads to profound breakthrough. Do not be discouraged when old patterns of worry, fear, and suffering seem stronger than ever. This is the ego's last desperate attempt to maintain control. Continue returning to the recognition of your true nature as awareness itself. The storm passes quickly when you do not feed it with your attention and belief. Remember that transformation rarely happens smoothly or linearly. Some days you will feel completely free from all suffering. Other days, old patterns will feel overwhelmingly real. Both experiences are perfect parts of the awakening process. Trust the intelligence that is orchestrating your liberation from all unnecessary pain. Another challenge is the tendency to turn consciousness techniques into new forms of mental effort. Students often strain to find awareness or become consciousness, missing the point entirely. You cannot achieve what you already are. Recognition is effortless because it discovers what has always been present. If you find yourself working hard to be aware, you are trying too hard. Awareness is the most natural thing possible. It is what you are using right now to understand these words. Rest in the ease of simply being conscious rather than trying to accomplish consciousness as a goal or achievement. The practices Goldsmith taught are invitations to stop effort, not increase it. When you notice yourself struggling with any technique, pause and laugh gently at the cosmic joke. You are trying to find what is already here, Achieve what you already are. Become what you have never stopped being. This recognition of the effortless nature of truth eliminates spiritual striving and seeking. You discover that enlightenment is not a future attainment, but the recognition of your present reality. Peace is not something you get. It is something you are when you stop trying to be something other than what you naturally are. Many students worry that accepting their true nature means becoming passive or losing motivation for practical living. This concern reveals a misunderstanding of consciousness work. Recognizing yourself as awareness actually makes you more effective, not less, because your actions arise from clarity rather than confusion and desperation. When you rest in your true identity, you still pay bills, maintain relationships, pursue goals, and handle challenges. But these activities happen from inner peace rather than anxiety. You engage fully with life while remaining inwardly free from attachment to outcomes and resistance to difficulties. Goldsmith lived as a successful teacher, author, and healer while maintaining perfect equanimity in all circumstances. Consciousness realization enhances your effectiveness in the world because you respond wisely rather than react emotionally. Your decisions become clearer, your relationships more authentic, your work more fulfilling. The fear of becoming passive dissolves when you discover that authentic action is far more powerful than desperate effort. When you operate from your true nature, you tap into the infinite intelligence and energy that creates and sustains the entire universe. Nothing you could accomplish through personal struggle compares to what flows through you naturally. The deepest challenge is the addiction to being someone with problems. Strange as it sounds, most people unconsciously cherish their difficulties because suffering provides a sense of identity and purpose. Without problems to solve, who would you be? This question terrifies the ego, but liberates your true self. Goldsmith observed that people often resist healing because they fear losing their familiar sense of self. Being a seeker or victim or striver feels more substantial than resting as contentless awareness. The mind prefers a dramatic identity, even a painful one, to the simplicity of just being. This addiction to problems explains why many people sabotage their own healing and happiness unconsciously. They approach consciousness techniques hoping to improve their suffering rather than transcend the sufferer entirely. They want a better dream rather than waking up completely from the dream of separation. If these insights about overcoming resistance speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment, which obstacle are you ready to release and transform now? Advanced practitioners learn to apply consciousness principles in the most challenging life situations. When diagnosed with serious illness, instead of identifying as a sick person fighting disease, you rest as the awareness within which the body's condition appears. This shift often produces remarkable healing, but more importantly, unshakable peace. Financial crises become opportunities to discover your true source of security. Instead of seeing yourself as someone who lacks money, recognize yourself as the consciousness that witnesses financial circumstances. From this inner abundance, practical solutions arise naturally and effortlessly without panic or desperation. Relationship conflicts transform when you stop defending a fictional sense of self and rest in your true nature. When there is no separate person to protect or justify, love flows naturally even toward those who seem to oppose you. This disarms conflict at its source and often heals relationships miraculously. Even facing death loses its terror when you recognize your true identity as deathless awareness itself. The body may pass away, but consciousness is eternal and indestructible. This recognition brings profound peace to end-of-life experiences and eliminates the fear that dominates so much of human existence unnecessarily. Daily life integration requires consistent practice of seeing through the illusion moment by moment. While stuck in traffic, instead of being an irritated driver, rest as awareness witnessing the experience of traffic. The situation remains the same, but your inner peace remains undisturbed by external circumstances. During difficult conversations, practice speaking from your true nature rather than defending personality positions. When someone criticizes or attacks you, remember that your real identity cannot be threatened by any words or opinions. This inner security allows you to respond with love rather than defensive reactivity. At work, handle stress by recognizing that the awareness observing workplace pressure is itself completely calm and unaffected. You can engage fully with professional demands while maintaining inner tranquility. Your performance often improves because clarity replaces anxiety as your operating system. Even mundane activities like washing dishes or waiting in lines become opportunities to anchor in consciousness. Instead of living on autopilot, use ordinary moments to remember your true nature. This transforms daily life into continuous spiritual practice without requiring additional time or special circumstances. The deepest integration happens when consciousness recognition becomes so natural that you rarely forget your true identity. Old patterns of suffering may still arise occasionally, but they feel like distant memories rather than compelling realities. You watch them with compassionate amusement rather than getting swept away. This stage brings incredible creativity and spontaneity because you are no longer constrained by limiting beliefs about what you can accomplish or deserve. Life becomes an adventure of discovery rather than a problem to solve. You realize that consciousness is inherently creative, intelligent, and benevolent. Relationships deepen profoundly when you consistently relate from your true nature. Others feel the peace and love radiating from your being and often experience their own healing simply through contact with your presence. You become a blessing to everyone you encounter without trying or striving. Physical health often improves dramatically as stress dissolves and the body's natural healing intelligence operates without interference from mental resistance. You may look years younger and feel more energetic because you are no longer depleting yourself with unnecessary psychological suffering and internal conflict. Master practitioners develop the ability to maintain consciousness recognition even during intense challenges that would previously have completely overwhelmed them. They discover an unshakable core of peace that remains steady through any life storm, whether personal loss, physical pain, or external chaos. This mastery is not about achieving a perfect life without problems, but about maintaining perfect inner freedom regardless of outer circumstances. You become like a mountain that remains unmoved by changing weather. Storms may rage around you, but your essential nature remains calm and unaffected. Others begin seeking your guidance naturally because they sense the authentic peace and wisdom you embody. You find yourself helping people not through advice or techniques, but simply through your presence. Your consciousness has become a healing influence that requires no words or actions. The ultimate realization is that your true nature as awareness is the same consciousness that creates and sustains the entire universe. You discover yourself as the one infinite being appearing as all the countless forms and experiences. This recognition brings indescribable gratitude and wonder. The complete transformation through Joel Goldsmith's consciousness approach reveals that suffering was always a case of mistaken identity. You discover that you have never actually been the limited, vulnerable person you believed yourself to be. This recognition is not philosophy, but direct, undeniable experience. Your daily experience becomes dominated by spontaneous gratitude, unconditional love, and effortless peace. Problems may still arise, but they no longer disturb your fundamental well-being. You handle challenges with wisdom and efficiency because you are no longer operating from fear or lack. The search for happiness, fulfillment, and security ends completely because you realize these qualities are inherent in your true nature as consciousness itself. You stop seeking outside yourself for what you already are. This inner completeness allows authentic enjoyment of life without desperation or attachment. Most remarkably, you begin seeing everyone and everything as expressions of the same consciousness you have discovered yourself to be. Separation becomes obviously illusory. This recognition naturally expresses itself as compassion, service, and unconditional love for all beings without exception. Your new perspective transforms every aspect of existence into a celebration of consciousness, recognizing itself. Work becomes play, challenges become adventures, relationships become opportunities for love to know itself more fully. Even ordinary activities carry an undercurrent of joy and wonder. Fear becomes impossible because you realize there is nothing separate from consciousness that could threaten it. Anger dissolves because there is no other to oppose. Sadness may arise as compassion for those who still believe in separation, but it carries no personal suffering or resistance. You live with incredible lightness and spontaneity because you are no longer carrying the heavy burden of being someone who needs to be fixed, improved, or defended. Your energy is freed up for creativity, service, and the simple enjoyment of being alive in this miraculous universe. Death loses all terror because you know yourself as the deathless awareness in which all bodies appear and disappear. Birth and death are seen as movements within consciousness, like waves on the ocean. The ocean itself is never born and never dies, and you know yourself as that eternal ocean. The ripple effects of your transformation touch everyone around you in ways you may never fully realize. Family members find themselves feeling more peaceful in your presence. Co-workers notice the stress level decreasing when you are around. Even strangers experience momentary peace when they encounter your awakened consciousness. You become a living demonstration that suffering is optional, that peace is possible, that love is our true nature. Without preaching or teaching formally, your very being communicates the truth that sets people free. You help heal the world simply by being authentically yourself. Your life becomes a testament to the power of consciousness to transform any circumstance. Whether you face health challenges, financial difficulties, or relationship problems, others witness how you navigate these situations with grace, wisdom, and unshakable inner peace that inspires their own awakening. The teaching continues spontaneously through your example long after you have forgotten about trying to be spiritual or enlightened. You discover that the highest service is simply being what you are, living from your true nature, and allowing consciousness to express itself naturally through your unique form. Joel Goldsmith's ultimate teaching is beautifully simple. You are consciousness itself, temporarily playing at being a separate person. The game is optional. Suffering ends the moment you remember what you really are, and stop trying to be what you are not. This recognition is available right now, in this very moment. Your true nature as awareness has never been touched by any experience of pain, lack, or limitation. These appearances arise within you like dreams, but they cannot harm or diminish what you essentially are. You are the screen on which all movies play, forever clean and unaffected. The practices dissolve naturally as you realize there is nothing to practice, nothing to achieve, nothing to become. You simply rest in what you have always been. This is not the end of spiritual life, but the beginning of authentic living from your true nature rather than false identity. If your understanding of suffering and consciousness has been transformed through these Joel Goldsmith teachings, like this video, subscribe for more life-changing spiritual wisdom, and comment "I am consciousness" to affirm your recognition of what you truly are.